Good morning. It's been a while since we did one of these, and I wanted to kind of show a couple of things that have popped into, that I've noticed in the last week or two, or in the last week, a couple of days really, that have really shown a difference in the entire COVID-19 mapping. And they happen to show a bit of good news, maybe. And I think it's important that we talk about the good news with the bad news. And here in the state of Texas, and the U.S. is the same way, we can look at those numbers in a second, we've seen a dramatic drop in the total number of deaths. It doesn't seem like much, 30 per day in the last, I don't know, week and a half. Obviously, there hasn't been, the state of Texas has a particular reporting mechanism where it takes 2-3 weeks for them to confirm deaths. And so the actual numbers are always 2 weeks behind. This was a matter of confusion in October, November, when there were some policy changes. But here, if we look back to the end of January, you see this really dramatic shift here that is really nice, actually. And I want to talk about why that might be the case. It's not what I want. I'll talk real quick about why that might be the case. And so let's go to our chalkboard. And one of the reasons that might be the case is obviously because of the vaccine, right? And so we've talked about the vaccine and what that might mean. And what's important here about this curvature is that you would, if we were to do the otherwise estimated curves that we've talked about before, you know, we have this slant and this turn that would otherwise look kind of like this other old distribution, but all of a sudden we have a very dramatic downshift. And while we don't have the numbers yet for the next 2 weeks, which are obviously behind us today, but there's an expectation that this is also going to be a dramatic downshift. And lots of debate, lots of discussion about what this means. And I would suggest, and I don't have any research for this, right? This is commentary and it's hypothesis, and it's not scientifically proven. I just, you know, it could be out there, but I haven't been able to find it yet, that this shift occurs for a variety of reasons. The first of which is that it is 3 weeks out from New Year's Day, right? And so you've got Christmas in here, you've got New Year's Day in here somewhere, and after the seasonal break, we're supposed to see a downshift. Well, that's fine. And so two things, right? I mean, clearly people did not stay home for Christmas. Clearly people did not stay home for New Year's. There's a lot of spreading. And so, you know, the total number of deaths increased because we just didn't do it. But even then, this should be a more natural shift down. The rate of shift is interesting, right? So it's not surprising that 3 weeks, 4 weeks after Christmas and New Year's that there's a downshift. That was kind of expected and predicted. What's interesting is the rate at which this shifts down. And if you look at the previous ones that we have here, this is a little dramatic, but it's very short. This one is not. The slant, the angle, the rate of the downslope is also not as short. This one looks fairly steep, right? And that's interesting. This is a steep drop, and that is very encouraging. Now, there's a bunch of different ideas why this would be a case. Obviously, the first one is that it's because of the vaccination and that people are getting vaccinated, which is great. And one of the other things I went out looking for this moment are the rates of vaccinations. This is as of mid-January. The numbers now are higher. I saw an article but couldn't find a pretty map that had Texas at somewhere between 8 and 9%. That's a terrible color. 8, and that's a terrible color too. Somewhere between 8 and 9% of the total population has already received 2 vaccinations, right? And we're just, you know, 2-3 weeks later. And so the rates of vaccinations are better than we expected them to be in this spread, in this time period, which is fantastic. And so there's a lot of negativity about the vaccines and the distribution of vaccines. And I would suggest to you that we are actually doing really, really well given the amount of traditional demand and supply that's out in the market right now. Matter of fact, right, so this is a chart of the total amount of people per country who have received vaccination. United States and China obviously are going to be higher because they have larger populations. But for the most part, that's steep. Again, the steepness of the curve increases. This is a cumulative chart, right? So it's always going to go up, and that's fantastic. If we were to find one by percentage or per 100 people, it might look more like this, right? And so again, a couple of things to note here. First of all, this is as of February 2nd. It is from the same data set we had before, but this one is per 100 people, right? And this one is total numbers, right? Matter of fact, a good sidebar for my students, and I intend to use this in class later, is that this article is trying to show that richer countries are giving more vaccine. And that makes sense, right? U.S., China, European, that Arab Emirates is a bit, UAE is a bit of an anomaly, Israel and UAE in this argument. But the idea is that these guys are bigger. United States, China, European Union, UK, India, Germany. You know, the larger populations are giving more vaccines. And that makes sense. And so while this is good measurement to see how things are going, we should also measure per 100 people. Israel is way off the charts here. I don't know why. I didn't spend any time looking at that. But the United States right here is this guy right here. Maybe I should change colors and do the purple one that they were expecting. Do I have a purple? I do. This purple guy and this purple guy right here, you know, really tell us that we're really close to that 10%, that 8, 9, 10% of the population having received a single dose, in this case, a single dose. And so you're going to see different numbers, and this is live data, relatively live data, so it's hard to know what's right, what's real and what isn't real. But compared to the rest of the world, you know, for the most part, the vaccine distribution actually looks pretty good. So I would suggest to you that things are kind of working. They're not working at the rate of distribution that we want them to work at, obviously. But things are okay. And, you know, people are still dying, and they're dying at a higher rate than they did last summer. So, you know, if you saw my earlier video on anchor points, you can keep that one in mind. It is a little concerning to watch, you know, other members of society go out and start to vacation, and a couple of other things that is going to continue to distribute the virus. And to that end, I want to return to this curvature and talk about this dramatic drop that we saw at the end of January. And I want to suggest, again, this is the part that is speculation, or if we were in class, I would call it a hypothesis, because now we would go out to look for data to try to prove this hypothesis. But I would suggest that the total number of deaths, that the drop in total number of deaths that we've seen at the end of the month has to do both with the 3-week gap that follows the end of the year holiday season, as well as the fact that those individuals who are getting the vaccine and that got the vaccine early as mid-January, are those more vulnerable populations that have the higher propensity for death. And so I would conclude a variety of things here, not the least of which is that the national distribution plans to focus on the vulnerable populations, particularly those of elder age, is working. And so what we want to see is not only do we want to see this curve drop, but we want it to drop steeply. And the steeper it drops, I think the more likely it is that vulnerable populations are not dying. And I think that's a really good sign. Hopefully that'll be the case here when we get additional data into mid-February. I think that also says that the first shot is relatively effective, right? There is a percentage of efficacy with just having one shot, and so the sooner you get the first shot makes a difference. But I also think that when you look at the national distribution rates, particularly compared with the rest of the world, and the steepness of this curve, if that particular hypothesis is true, that the drop in death has more to do with your personal vulnerabilities than the entire population's vulnerabilities, then it also means that you don't have to rush out there and cut the line when it comes to going to get your vaccine. We are going to be okay, and it looks like we're going to be okay. You know, by the time we get to maybe mid-March, I think we're going to be very much down on a downslope in terms of deaths. And again, we have that 3-week gap, right? So I would suggest that you cancel spring break. Spring break is in here. People are going to want to go traveling. People are going to want to go skiing and surfing and whatever else you do on spring break. I would suggest if we, you know, as a community, stay home for spring break, that we're going to have a great summer. You can see how much people don't stay home for spring break when we have a little loop here in April. But we're so close, and it looks like there's plenty of vaccine, and it looks like there's plenty of vaccine coming. The timelines just aren't in our favor. There are great ethical, terrible, but great ethical conversations about when you personally, as an individual, should go get the vaccine. And for those of you who are not cutting the line, you're not alone. The majority of people are not, you know, are allowing those individuals who are obese, chronic smokers, which I'm not the biggest fan of, and the elderly to, you know, to take their place. And I think we're going to continue to see that steepness in that curve. And so there are lots, and I get it, you know, when you get to the front line, you're scared. We're all scared. There's affect and there's emotion. But I think that as a mathematician, as a statistician, watching the steepness of this curve go down symbolizes something big and something important. And it symbolizes that this plan, this national plan, whether it's regulated by your local hospital or not, makes a difference. And I think we're going to be okay. So I hope that helps. I hope it's been interesting. I'm trying not to do too many of these anymore. This one was particularly interesting here to see that the U.S. is, you know, putting out a bunch of vaccines. And in terms of the per capita rate, again, the U.S. is, you know, at, you know, 10% of the population giving the first shot. We're on a great path. It's just going to take an extra month or two. And if you estimated that you were going to get your shot in April or May, it looks like it's going to happen faster than that. So, you know, a little bit of patience, a little bit of empathy, and I think we're going to be all right. That's before any conversations about variants and strains, right? So let's focus. I would suggest that you let the researchers focus on that one, and that we focus on the matter at hand, which is the first round of COVID stuff, and try to get that curvature to drop, you know, to begin with. So good luck. I hope you guys are staying safe, and I'll talk to you sometime soon.